Hello, students. I'm Sam sir, and we are in the third and the last part of the chapter's video. The chapter number is 4. The title is The Mughal Empire. We are going to talk about only one emperor here in this chapter. That is the Emperor Aurangzeb, who reigned in India from 1658 to 1707. And apart from this, the chapter is about the administration of the Mughals and the court, etc. Now, this is an artistic rendition of what the Emperor Aurangzeb might have looked at like. But in his real life, he was a very simple and austere man. He used to not wear expensive dresses, and he used to not adorn himself with jewelry. The real name of Aurangzeb was Muhyiddin Muhammad, and Aurangzeb was his sobriquet. It means ornament of the throne. So he used to believe that since I myself am the ornament, there is no need for me to wear silver and gold and precious stones. He was also given the title of Alamgir. This means the conqueror of the world. He was last of the great Mughals. We had in the previous two parts of this chapter's videos, we had seen about the six Mughal emperors, and those six were known as the great Mughals. Now, this one was the last one, and he ruled for a very long period of 49 years. The empire reached its largest size during his long reign. It covered nearly the whole of India. If you look at this map, the dark orange portion, that was the extent of his empire. Only for a tiny bit in the south, the entire country was ruled by this emperor. About his life, he was a very strict disciplinarian and a very orthodox, God fearing Muslim. He used to copy the Quran. He also used to save caps and sold them uh, around the mosques. And he led a very simple lifestyle. That is the reason he was also known as Zinda Pir or the living saint. He never wore costly robes. He never used gold and silver vessels. Also, whatever money he required for his personal use, he was not taking it from the treasury of the palace. This painting shows Aurangzeb as the Zinda Pir, the very humble, saintly emperor. Now, about when we see about his whole reign, it was full of revolts. The reason was about his policies. For example, he increased the land tax in northern India. It was earlier one third. That is one third is 33.33%. From that he raised it up to half the produce. That is 50%. From 33.33% he raised it to 50%. The next was then those who revolted, especially the Jats of Mathura and Agra region, the Satnamis and the Bundelas. He naturally the people who were depending more on agriculture revolted against his land tax. Aurangzeb followed the policy of interference in the affairs of the Rajput states. This is just the opposite of what Akbar was doing of Mewar and Marwar. This resulted in strained relationships with the otherwise loyal Rajputs. He spent time, resources, and energy in crushing these revolts. His longest and the toughest struggle was against the Marathas, with Shivaji as a leader. Shivaji himself was a powerful ruler, and he was strong. He had a very good army. He had very good ministers. He had very good policies. He had very good support from the people. That is the reason why Aurangzeb was never able to triumph in Deccan. This is a scene, a painting from a scene showing the battle between the Marathas and Aurangzeb. You have these Marathas in their typical Maratha attire. Now let's talk about his Deccan policy. Now he reigned for totally 49 years. Out of those 49 years, 24 years, that is nearly 50%, nearly half of the time, he reigned in the Deccan region. He succeeded in conquering Bijapur state in 1686 and Golconda in 1687. But he was not able to subdue Shivaji and his successor. Shambhaji was the eldest son of Shivaji. He was also as strong as Shivaji. So there he couldn't do anything. Aurangzeb was not able to win over them. This resulted in an independent Maratha state. But his prolonged absence from the northern India weakened the administration there and depleted the treasury. Can you imagine somebody who's reigned for 49 years spending 24 years out of his own area? That was bound to make his own administrative area weaker. And that happened. And it finished off the treasury also. Now, also because of the conquest of Bijapur and Golconda, the Mughals came directly in confrontation with the Marathas because Bijapur and Golconda they had the Maratha support. He was not successful to crush the Marathas, and this only resulted in wastage of money, time, and resources, lot of death of his soldiers, lot of life to his property, his elephants, his horses. He did not have the vision about his reign or his kingdom. So it was his own policy or policies which were responsible for the decline of the Mughal Empire. In just the opposite manner to Akbar, in right contrast, Akbar was a tolerant person and he had finished off the Jazia tax. Now, this man, Aurangzeb, was just the opposite. He was not tolerant towards other religions and he introduced the Jazia tax once again. And this made him very unpopular with the non Muslims. Jazia tax, as you know, is the tax which was imposed on people who were not Muslims. Now, about the reign of Aurangzeb, we get the information from these three important books. One is Alamgir Nama, written by Muhammad Kazim. The second one is Nuska-e Dilkusha by Bhimsen. The third one is Futuhat-e Alamgiri by Ishwar Das. Now, this man, Aurangzeb, this emperor, he never patronized historians. Other emperors used to patronize historians and story writers. They were inviting people to write about them. They were asking them to write about their biographies. But Aurangzeb did not do it ever. It so happened that his successors, the people who came into power after Aurangzeb, were corrupt. They were weak and not efficient. And the nobles used to control these rulers. That is one more reason of the downfall of the Mughal Empire. Now we have ended about studying the finish. We have finished about studying the seven emperors of the Mughal Empire. Now we are going to talk about the administration in the Mughal Empire. What was the position of the emperor in Mughal administration? If this could be an examination question, then what you had to write is that emperor was all powerful and uh, he had all the powers. Now the Mughal administration was a blend of Central Asia, India, and Persia. The systems which were followed by the emperors in these three places. Our Mughal Empire in India was a mixture of all that, and the empire had a very centralized structure in its administration. Emperor was all powerful. Next in line of importance were the nobles or the ruling elite. The emperor's duties were mainly these two, the first and second, Jahanbani and Jahangiri. Jahanbani means to protect the state from attackers, from the invaders, and Jahangiri means to extend his own empire, increase the area of his own kingdom by fighting against the neighbors and incorporating them, annexing them into his own kingdom. Along with this, the emperor was also having a role which was four in one. He was the lawmaker. He used to make the law, and he was the chief executive also. He was the one who was responsible for executing the law. Also, he was the commander in chief of the army. He had his army, and he was the main commander of the army. And the fourth one is he was also the final dispenser of justice. Now, what the nobles did, the emperor had a support of the nobles and ministers, but the final authority was always retained by the emperor himself. The nobles also made policies and programs which were helpful in economic and cultural progress. In this way, the emperor could ensure prosperity and prestige at political and social levels. Here we find that although the emperor is the center of all the affairs, surrounding him were the nobles and the elite, the people who were his ministers. And these ministers used to make policies and programs which were, if they were helpful for economic and cultural progress, the emperor used to approve of them. And that is the reason why there was prosperity uh, in the nation, in the empire, and prestige at the political and social levels. But if you compare the administration, the central administration of Babur and Humayun, with that of Akbar, we find the following differences. The reign of Babur and Humayun were short and full of upheaval. They were also full of military campaigns. That is the reason they could not pay much attention to the definite system of administration. But if you look at Akbar, he was a man with a very clear, defined view. His vision was very clear. His policies were very sound, and his implementation of the policies was also very good. So, with Akbar began an all-round development of the empire, and this resulted in an efficient system of administration. Now, the important officials in the Mughal Empire are like this. The head is the emperor or the king. The wazir is the prime minister. Those of you who play chess and use the terms such as the wazir and Raja and Rani, you know what we're talking about. The Diwan was the head of revenue department. The Mir Bakshi was in charge of the military. Khan Isaman was a person who attended to the needs of the royal household. Sadr-i Sadur was a person who maintained records of grants and donations made by the emperor. Qazi was a chief judge. Now we'll talk about the provincial administration, just like the state government. The states were known as Suba. The empire was divided into provinces, they were known as Subas, and the Subedar or the governor looked after each province, and he was also the head of each Suba. Now, the governor or the subedar was a link between the province and the emperor, and each suba was further divided into districts, just like the state is divided into districts. The districts are of today can be compared to sarkars of those days, and just like today the districts are divided into tehsils. Similarly, in those days the sarkars were divided into parganas. And just like each tehsil has got several villages, the parganas consist of many villages in those days. There was a designation known as Kotwal. He was in charge of town administration. He had both civil and police duties, and he was responsible for maintaining law and order. If somebody had to be arrested, this Kotwal would go and get them arrested. Now let us see about the army administration. The Mughal army consisted of cavalry, infantry, artillery, and the elephants. Cavalry are the soldiers on horseback. Infantry are the soldiers who use and maintain guns. Even the larger guns or the field guns, or what is known as top in Hindi. uh, the infantry are the soldiers who are on foot. The artillery is the section which is dealing with guns and arms, especially the firearms like top and rifles, and they were responsible for the artillery. The elephants of those days had the role similar to the battle tanks or the pattern tanks have the role in our army today. The Mir Bakshi was in charge of the army. His job was to recruit soldiers, train them, maintain their hulia or their appearance, branding their horses and elephants, and sometimes he was also the commanding officer for the army. And he was responsible for managing all the military supplies. Also, he was a military advisor to the emperor. The Mir Bakshi, he deputed Mansabdars for the security of the palace and changed them every day. Changing the Mansabdars every day was because of protecting the king. If soldiers are also conspiring within themselves of killing the king, that should not happen. That is the reason they used to change the guards every day. Now the other designations are Mir-e-Atish. He was also known as Daroga-e-Top Khana. He was responsible for the artillery. He was in charge of the artillery. Even when you when you burst crackers in Diwali, in Hindi you say Atish Baji. Just see that word, Mir-e-Atish. Now the next designation was known as Daroga-e-Dak Shoki. He was the head of department of the state, and he appointed ministers in various provinces. He collected important information from them. In this way, he could keep the emperor informed about every small or big affair within the empire because he had informers, he had people who were informing him, and he was collecting all the information from people. Now, we'll talk about Mansabdari system. For that, you understand what is a Mansab. Mansab is a position or rank. So, anybody who holds a position or rank is known as Mansabdar. The Mansabdar was personally chosen by the emperor, and this man could be promoted or demoted, or even he could be transferred from one place to another. So these Mansabdars were very loyal to the emperor, and the emperor controlled the empire through them. The Mansabdari system gave the Mansabdar income from two sources. One is the fixed salary which he got from the emperor. The second one was known as the revenue from the Jagir. Jagir is the estate, the land. They were given lands on which they could do agriculture, and they could also collect some revenue from their own areas, and some of it they had to give to the king, and other money they could use it for their own expenses. This Mansabdas used this income to pay his soldiers. These people were having their own soldiers, and also this money was used for maintaining their own household. The maximum number of revenue reforms were carried out by Emperor Akbar. That is the reason why he was very successful. Now we are talking about revenue reforms. Revenue is the money which the empire or the country gets from people in the form of taxes or duties. The Mughal emperors required financial resources to maintain such a large empire. For this, they depended on two sources of revenue. First one is known as land revenue. The money which they got from the land or the use of land is known as land revenue. And the money which they got from the market trading, the business, is known as the trade revenue. Now, depending on the fertility of the land had four types. The first one is known as polage. This is the fertile land, and it was cultivated to yield good quality crops always. The second one, don't read it as Paruti, you read it as Padti. Padti is land kept fallow, means it was a fertile land, but it was left without cultivation. This is done to allow it to regain its fertility. They leave it for 2 3 seasons, and in the fourth season again start cultivating. So for these 2 3 seasons, this land is known as Parti Bhumi, or land which is just left fallow, not used at the present. The third type is known as Chachar. It was kept fallow for 3 4 years, and again this is to allow it to regain its fertility. Chachar was left unused for longer time than Parti Bhumi. That is the meaning of it. And then the fourth type was the land which was not usable at all. Banjar, this was poor quality land which could not be cultivated. Now we talk about the land revenue reforms, and there was one minister who was largely responsible for this. His name is Raja Todarmal. Earlier, the taxes which the emperor collected or his ministers collected from the people was a fixed percentage, either 33.33% or 50%. But in Akbar's time, this Raja Todarmal, he had a land revenue collection system which was, even for those days, it was very modern and very good, and it was very efficient, and also it was well accepted by the people. This man, Todarmal, was Akbar's revenue minister and the main person to design the revenue system for the emperor. This system of land revenue is known as Todarmal's Bandobast. So, if you are asked what is Todarmal's Bandobast, you have to say that this is the method of collecting land revenue designed by Todarmal, who was Akbar's revenue minister. Land was measured, and also the sea. Now, here two things are there. One is the size of the land, and the second is fertility of the land. So, because if the fertility is good and the size is large, the farmer could pay higher tax. So the revenue was fixed according to this. According to the fertility, the land could be good, average, or bad. So these were three classes of land, and along with that was the factor of the land size. So what Raja Todarmal's surveyors used to do, they used to visit the village in every season. And earlier they were using ropes for measuring the size of the land. But ropes had a problem. If they got wet, they increase in length, and if they dry, they shrink, they become smaller in length. So they were not reliable to measure the size of the land. So what Todamal did, he was using bamboo reed ropes, and these were joined together with iron rings. Now, these bamboo reed ropes were not expanding and contracting as much as the previous ropes were contracting and expanding, and this resulted in accuracy of measurement. The land revenue system was known as Dahasala. Daha means 10. Also in Marathi, Daha means 10. And this Dahasala system was introduced in the year 1580. The peasants had to pay the tax that was fixed as per the average produce and the average price over the last 10 years. So Daha means 10, and that is where that word 10 is applicable here. So whatever the farmer has produced in the 10 years, an average was taken. The produce of first year plus second year plus third year plus fourth year up to 10th year, that whole amount was divided by 10 and an average was taken, and that was the basis of the tax. Now, whatever was the amount out of that, one third, that is 33.33%, was the tax usually paid to the ruler. Now, there was a village headman in every village. He was known as Mukaddam. He collected the land revenue. He could collect it in cash also and in kind also. Kind means the crop, the agricultural produce. If it was wheat, he could collect wheat, or he could collect the money from the farmers or the peasants. And this was done at the time of the harvest. And after collecting the tax, this person used to give them a receipt, a written receipt that he's got the money. And Then he used to pay this tax. The Mukaddam used to pay the tax in the state treasury. Now, if you look at the economic and social conditions of the Mughal uh, empire, the Mughal court was a ceremonial court. You know the ceremony which were there in Afghan times also. The emperor sat on a magnificent throne, and the nobles either stood or sat at lower levels than the emperor. The important nobles sat near the emperor, and there were two halls of audience. These two halls of audience are known as Diwan-e-Khas and Diwan-e-Am. The Diwan-e-Khas was the hall of private audience, and the reports from nobles and other heads were read at appointed times in Diwan-e-Khas. So it was not for the common man, it was for nobles only. Now, about Diwan-e-Am, this was the hall of public audience. Any person from the country, from the empire, any common man, if he had a judicial matter, he could get the hearing done in Diwani-am. The general public could come and get justice from the emperor, and Sijda and Paibos were performed before the emperor. Sijda and Paibos are like in Paibos, you lie down on your face in front of the emperor and kiss the ground in front of his feet. And Sijda means you sit on your knees, both your knees, and raise your palm facing towards your own face and raise them up. That is Sijda. During Akbar's reign, Karnish and Taslim were also performed. The definitions are there in textbook. It is to keep the the palms of the hand flat on the floor in front of the emperor while you're sitting on your knees. That is Taslim. Now, this is court. This is Diwani Khas or the special court. This picture is from Fatehpur Sikri in Rajasthan. Also, this is the Diwan-e-Am or the court of the common man, again from Fatehpur Sikri. Towards the 17th century, the Mughal court had two divisions. One was the Orthodox. They were more dominant during the Aurangzeb's time. The second one was liberals. They were more powerful during the reign of Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Let's see how was the condition of agriculture in those days. Now, agriculture was the most important primary occupation during the Mughal times. Land was the most important source of revenue. So you know there were two sources of revenue. One was land and the other one was trading. So out of that, land revenue was given more importance. So all the rulers made special efforts to increase the productivity of the land, because if the productivity is more, the tax collected would be more. And they encouraged farmers to bring more land under cultivation. And when the peasants did this, they even exempted them from paying tax, maybe for one season or two seasons. The peasants or the farmers were had a tax holiday; they did not pay tax because later on they could collect. The land revenue was equal to either one third, that is 33.33% of the total agricultural produce, or sometimes it was increased to one half, that was 50%. And as long as the peasants paid the tax, nobody could take their land away from them. But this resulted in problem for the small farmers. If they pay this much of tax, half of the goods which they produce, if they have to give that in tax, then that will leave them poor. That is the reason many farmers could not pay the increasing demand for tax. This made them landless, and these landless farmers, they started working on land which were owned by zamindars, and that is how the zamindari system came into existence in India. For working, toiling there in the zamindars' farms, they were paid either in cash or in the form of agricultural produce, that is the kind or the crops. This is end of the chapter, end of the third part also. And this one is an European painting. It shows uh, some British army men meeting one of the Mughal emperors. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.